Hi, guys. Hi, everyone. Hi, guys. Hi. Hey, guys, our guests are here already. I'm going to let them in the room. Let's see. All right. Thanks for joining, folks. Thanks for joining.
Hmm.
Hi, Bonita.
Hi, Sophia.
How are you? Hi, Emma.
Hi, Sophia. Hi,
Hi,
Bonita.
everyone. This is Bonita, our guest, and our holistic health director, Emma Louie. This is amazing, guys. Thank you so much again for another amazing conversation. We
Mm,
had so many asks and so many, like, where are they? Bring them back. We want the
yeah.
second half. Hurry up. And so I'm so glad that we can continue the conversation. Great book recommendations, folks. Everything's over here. So they're ready. They're ready, guys. They're pumped.
Yeah,
So
yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, big time. So I'll get started with our land acknowledgement and then our little
Mm.
introduction. I'm going to hand it right over to you guys because they don't want me in the way. So, Canadian Women of Color Leadership Network is a nonprofit organization, a grassroots organization that was established in 2018 in Canada's National Capital Region. CWCLN does recognize that our office is located on the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We acknowledge and respect all First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. We respectfully acknowledge and appreciate our presence on the Algonquin Anishinaabe ancestral lands. We're grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory with you today, and we will continue to work in solidarity towards improving the lives of our diverse people on this shared land and acknowledge the importance and commitment to decolonization toward working in partnership with our Indigenous communities.
Mm.
So CWCLN was founded on the pillars of women in leadership, wellness, economic development, and of course, great community partnerships. We operate through the lens of intersectional feminist and post-colonialistic framework and all of our objectives. Our aim is to see racialized women, two-spirit trans, non-binary femmes reflected in upper-level leadership and management positions in the workplace by providing the necessary skills, tools, and connections to mitigate systemic barriers. And with that, folks, I'm going to hand it over to our host, Emma. Have a great conversation, guys. I'll be back at the end.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks so much, Sophia. Hi, everyone. Hi, Bonita. Thanks, everyone,
Hello,
for
Emma.
joining this conversation. Hi. I just want to first thank the folks at the Canadian Women of Color Leadership Network, Sophia, Delia, and Raquel, who have provided awesome ongoing support. I see folks joining now, so welcome. As Sophia mentioned, my name is Emma Louie. I am the Holistic Health Director for the network. My pronouns are she, her. I'm joining from Gatineau on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. And this is the second session of our Burnout and Holistic Health series. Today's talk is going to be on hope in the midst of organizer burnout, grief, and anxiety. And we're joined by Bonita Ford. Welcome, Bonita.
Hello,
And
Emma.
hi, very excited to be in conversation with you on this topic today. And before we turn to Bonita, I'm just going to share a bit about myself, why we created this series, and what burnout is. And then we'll shift to Bonita, who will introduce herself. And then she and I will have a conversation about this topic on burnout, organizer burnout. And then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. So, if folks are just joining, welcome. This is the Canadian Women of Color Leadership Network's Burnout and Holistic Health series today on Organizer Burnout. My name is Emma. I'm Toisanese and Cantonese. I was born and raised in Ottawa. I've worked in social justice for more than 12 years, mostly in water justice, which is actually how I first met Bonita.
Mhm.
And I've worked in research in healthcare, climate, and other issues. I'm currently a member of Biblioterre, which is a land-based co-op near Wakefield. I'm also a contributing editor for rabble.ca. And I shifted to working in holistic health a few years ago. I offer holistic nutrition, biodynamic craniosacral therapy, and theta healing, which focuses on core beliefs. I work in Ottawa and Wakefield, and I often work with activists and organizers and people on community work or social justice work. Also work with people on front who are frontline workers, caregivers, and other people in care work. I work with people to support their health, whether that's gut issues or anxiety or depression. Is often linked to burnout. I think it's rare for me to work with somebody that isn't experiencing burnout. And I often try and make links to some of the bigger systems in which we live. So that's racism, white supremacy, capitalism, colonization, patriarchy. And we're going to touch on some of these bigger issues in our conversation with Bonita today. And I also work with them on how these bigger systems sit in our bodies. I started in holistic health because I was doing work to heal my own burnout, and some of the deeper issues that were coming up in my own healing were social justice issues that came out in my activism, whether that was the extractive nature of capitalism, hyper individualism, white supremacy, or anxiety and grief over what's happening to the climate or the Earth's waterways. So a lot of this we're going to touch on today. Some of the people that I work with experience intergenerational trauma, which stems from the very issues we work on to dismantle or end in social justice movements. So that can be things like colonization, war, or gender-based violence. And I see the parallels between holistic health and healing and social justice, even though they seem like two very different worlds. But there's very strong connections between them. So these experiences underlie why I created this series. I know many fellow organizers or activists, and Bonita, you probably do as well, who talk about burnout, and yet there's still a massive need to work on the issues that we do. We wanted to create this series where we talk about how do we recover from burnout and how do we reconnect to health and foster hope in these times while continuing to do this much needed work. My interest in burnout is I experienced several bouts of burnout. At times I would work on hours on end without taking breaks, working into the night, eating on the go, traveling a lot, and generally ignoring what my body needed, which was sometimes as basic as food and water and rest. And I experienced many burnout symptoms that I'm about to talk about, including compassion fatigue, major digestive issues. Thanks for the heart in the chat, Celestial Bean. I know folks are just joining, so I'm being joined with Bonita Ford on a conversation about organizer burnout. I'm just sharing my own experience with burnout. Over the years, I developed better habits. I've done a lot of digging into the roots of burnout, but I'm still undoing some of the deeper issues that are linked to burnout, which we're going to talk about today and in this series. And over the years, I realized the importance of dealing with emotions like grief and anxiety and other emotions that I felt from water justice work or other work. I think this is a huge gap in broader social movements, is not carving out the time and space to process these really big emotions that we feel in this work, which is, I think, often linked to burnout. And so addressing organizer burnout is particularly important because people are leaving movement work. We're losing people who have institutional knowledge, who have long time experience working on various social justice issues, or people continue working when they're not well and they are experiencing a range of emotions and health conditions. So I just want to go over quickly what burnout is. And there's a broad range of definitions, and then also how it shows up in the body. So it can be a bunch of things that I mentioned. And welcome to the folks who are just joining. We're talking about organizer burnout. So some of the symptoms can be fatigue, anxiety, depression, digestive issues. So many people have irritable bowel syndrome, different digestive issues, headaches, waking up exhausted, or sometimes the reverse, being wired and not being able to sleep, having insomnia, frequent illnesses, lack of interest or motivation for their usual work, or compassion fatigue, as I mentioned. So burnout is a state of exhaustion, whether that's mental, physical, emotional, or spiritual. and it stems from being in fight, flight, or freeze. These are states that our nervous systems go into when there's a threat, whether that's real or perceived. Our bodies go into these states to protect ourselves, but that can tax our body over time and can result in burnout. It's when our sympathetic system is activated and stays on. So other symptoms include increased heart rate. Our adrenal glands pump out cortisol and other stress hormones, and cortisol in the body for a long time can lead to inflammation, and chronic inflammation can then lead to illness. It's the basis for a lot of illness that we see these days. Our digestion slows, and then muscle tension can affect our circulation as well. And I just want to go over briefly the factors that contribute to burnout, and there are a range of them. Can be things like chronic stress, overwork, which is common for organizers. What we eat can have an impact. So stimulants such as caffeine or refined sugars, refined foods can also contribute to burnout. And then food sensitivities or allergies, and there can be a cyclical relationship. Burnout or stress can cause food sensitivities, and then when we eat the things that we're sensitive to, then that can tax our body more, make our body work harder. Things like trauma, PTSD, complex PTSD, intergenerational and collective trauma. Traumatic experiences put our bodies into the fight, flight, or freeze that I talked about. Things like the reality of racism, whether that's anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, or anti-Asian racism. Not feeling safe in our communities can have a significant impact on our nervous system. And people who face systemic barriers, BIPOC, queer communities, people with disabilities, especially through the pandemic, have a real impact on our nervous systems and feeling safe. And then collective trauma, things like the climate crisis, and that is ongoing and being exacerbated. And so people having to deal with the very real day-to-day things like flooding or forest fires, and then also just the uncertainty of what the climate crisis is going to bring. And then colonization of Indigenous peoples, COVID, and so forth. And then I mentioned intergenerational trauma, this trauma experienced by our ancestors that are passed down family lines, and things like war, famine, violence against women can also impact our nervous systems. And then I just want to talk about grind culture before I pass it off to Bonita. It's important to talk about how our economic system, capitalism, causes or feeds burnout. We're taught that our worth is tied to productivity. Even for organizers who are anti-capitalist, I think some of us can still internalize this need to be productive, though for different motivations. And then organizers or activists often feel guilty for resting because of what's happening in the world. There's so much happening in the world that it's hard to take a break from it when we know how much work needs to be done. And organizers or activists have a unique challenge that social justice work is often unpaid. So we're juggling paid work to pay our bills, family responsibilities, and then volunteer work that we might be doing. And then people who work full-time in social justice also face the challenge of work that's never ending, limited resources, and then responsibilities outside of the paid work, plus the perception that sometimes our work isn't often paying off. Thanks for that, Sunshine. And then we're also, I mentioned, dealing with hyper individualism, so that when we burn out, it's our fault and we have to feel alone. So we're going to talk about community care and collective care in this conversation today. And then I just want to talk about how the extractive nature of capitalism pervades our communities and sometimes organizing as well, in how we work, and then how the groups that we work with or our places of work, what they require of us is that there is the subconscious belief that our bodies are limitless resources, because we live in a world that sees certain bodies as indispensable, particularly Black and brown bodies, and the earth is treated that way as well. So key to healing from burnout is addressing these larger systems that are linked to burnout. So with that, I'm going to turn to Bonita, who I'm going to delve deeper with these issues with. So I'll just read Bonita's bio, and then she'll introduce herself some more. So Bonita Eloise Ford is the author of the book Embers of Hope: Embracing Life in an Age of Ecological Destruction and Climate Chaos. She supports people in coping with and addressing ecological and climate breakdown using permaculture, nonviolent communication, and Reiki. Bonita has a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry from Queen's University, a MA in Holistic Health Education from John F. Kennedy University in California, and a diploma in permaculture from L'Université Populaire de Permaculture. My French isn't great, so from France. And then the land she calls home is 1/5 of an acre in Perth, Ontario, on unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. There she loves talking to the plants, eating wild foods, and dancing barefoot on the earth. To learn more about her work, you can visit www.livingearth.net and www.embersofhopebook.com. And we'll put those links in the chat as well. So with that, I'll ask you to join me in welcoming Bonita Ford.
Thanks, Emma. I'm so glad to be here today. So the first thing I wanted to share about was just the beginning of my journey, or it was maybe a moment in my journey around self-care, and also it connected back to the seeds of my book, Embers of Hope. And so it was around 2012 that a very dear friend of mine was diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. And some people consider this a terminal diagnosis. And I had the privilege of being amongst a small group of friends and family members who were there to support my friend in this process. And I really saw very directly and immediately how my energy levels, how my emotional state, how my mental state, how all of that affected what I could give and what I could offer. And that if I showed up and if I was depleted, that would impact the rest of the team. And so I saw very quickly the importance of me eating well and sleeping well, and taking time away from my friend to do exercise and meditate in order to be at my best, so that when I was there, I really could be a good support to her and to her family. And I learned so much from that process, and her healing journey, her dying journey, for me really became a metaphor for how I want to live my life in this time. And it was really about learning to do both, to put intentionality into creating positive change, into nurturing the life around us, into embracing our lives and doing everything that we can to be healthy and create health and harmony and well-being around us. And at the same time, learning to accept what we can't control and to make peace with uncertainty, to make peace with what is not in our hands. And that includes so many of the crises in the world. That also includes our mortality. And so for me, that journey with my friend Catherine really, it seeded this last decade of my work in writing, and the direction that my work has taken in working with groups and supporting individuals. And so, and burnout is a part of that. You know, I want to share more about that. And I'm also I just want to start with inviting all of us just to take a moment to check in with ourselves and where we are in this moment. And so for those of you who are on the call with us live, please take just take a breath and notice how you're feeling in this moment. And I want to invite each of you to write in the chat box just one word for how you're feeling right now. So, how are you feeling in this moment? And I think I'm inviting us to check in with ourselves because this is, for me, this is so much about the the journey through burnout is thank you. So yes, it's I resonate so much with that it is a healing journey and feeling grateful in this moment and also feeling exhausted. So yes, being here, being present, all of this is part of learning to move through burnout and also to heal from burnout. And for me, it's about that self-awareness, being able to connect with ourselves, to know ourselves better, to know what we need, and to learn to attend to that. Yeah, so feeling exhausted, feeling excited and nervous, feeling tired. So all of this, yes, contented and a bit anxious. All of that. And so our experiences can be so, so full. And for me, that's part of what I want to bring, that I bring to people through the book, through my workshops, is just this idea that we can really hold both. That being with our grief, being with our exhaustion, being with our despair and discouragement, that all of this is healthy and honoring, and that we can hold this in an intentional way, in a thoughtful way, and try to actively just cultivate a sense of well-being, to cultivate peace, to cultivate gratitude, to cultivate connection, to cultivate beauty in our lives, in spite of what we struggle with, and maybe even because of what we struggle with.
Yeah, thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm.
I thank you so much for sharing about your friend, and it's beautiful, like how it shifted you and made you reflect in terms of how you're showing up in the world
Mm-hmm.
and for people, and I really love when you talk about holding both,
Mm-hmm.
because oftentimes we see the extremes of people working full out, full on, or not doing it at all. And
Yes.
so I think that like finding that middle ground or that medium of like of being able to hold both is really beautiful. And it links to a question that I have about how many organizers or activists are so passionate about the work that they do, whether that's climate or anti-racism or land or water defense, or Indigenous solidarity, but are burning out while they're doing it. And
Mm-hmm.
many of the roles that if they don't do that, they're in roles where if they don't do that work, they believe the work won't get done.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's actually the case because of limited resources, and sometimes it's the responsibility that we put on ourselves. So when you talk about holding both, like how do we balance that the work that needs to be done versus caring for our health? And I know you, maybe it's not the verses, right? And caring for our health. And I know you talked about things like fostering gratitude, but do you have some things that you do in your life where it is the balancing of the both?
Mm-hmm. So, and for me, I think I also I want to acknowledge that I very much struggle with burnout. And I think I was really struck by what Mary said in the first session in this series about burnout being a systemic issue, and that the burden of so much the burden of social justice work so often lies on the shoulders of marginalized people doing unpaid work. And and so for me, it really, I can relate to so many caregivers and so many activists because I care so deeply, and I'm sure everyone on this call today really cares and feels deeply as well too. And I I feel a sense of urgency. And I also fully recognize that I am a product of the mainstream dominant culture that so the capitalist system that teaches us or fully encourages us to work ourselves into the ground, and the culture that teaches us that our bodies are disposable and that people are disposable and plants and animals and water and soil are disposable. And so for me, burnout is just one of the many symptoms of us living within that and trying to change that. And for me, it's an ongoing practice of, so there have been a couple of periods of my life where I've really crashed. And one time it was more subtle, but it took me, I think, years to really come back to fullness. And another time where the crash was much more, it felt more intense. And I also was I had more resources. I was better resourced in myself at the time and taking care of myself. And so I was able to replenish my energy in a matter of months. And and all of and those experiences teach me that, as my cup is getting emptier, or as the rainwater tank in my garden is getting emptier, or when I look at the in when I'm driving, and the little dial on the car, and that's pointing towards empty with the gas tank, I realize how I treat other things sometimes, or I can treat other things with more mindfulness than I treat my body. Like how often do we let ourselves drive the car with the arrow pointing at empty or below empty, compared to how often we do that with our bodies? And so again, just coming back to this sense of self-awareness and checking in with ourselves. And so for me, all my it is I've crashed or come close to crashing enough to really see the value of slowing down and replenishing. And I do that through checking in with myself regularly. I do that through taking little moments of quiet, taking walks in periods where I have more flexibility, taking a half day off, taking a full day off, taking a long, long weekend off, and unplugging from social media. So there are going for walks, sitting by the river, sitting in my backyard. There are so many things that I do for self-care. And and what I really want to invite folks to consider is how self-care can be a way of being. So over and above the things that we can do to take care of ourselves, that the balance of burnout and care, part of the invitation there is to live with awareness, to live with gratitude, to live in a way where we can be regularly refilling our tank, replenishing ourselves in our everyday lives. And so that can be also, for me, gratitude is such a big part of that, being present in my life and pausing. And so for me, that looks like, before I eat, taking a moment to give thanks for the food, to be grateful for the day, to be grateful for all that supports me. And having that small gratitude practice is part of what helps me keep my tank refilling over time. And I think part of it is, just us being together today too. So connecting with community, being with like-minded, like-hearted people, that refuels me. That gives me a sense of hope. And um, I do want to come back to this piece on hope. I want to come back to this in a moment. Um, and I think just on the piece around, because I've been talking about personal healing and personal care and self-care. And Emma, I really appreciate when I really, really love listening to you speak about community care and community healing beyond the individual. And and so when I think about what I know of you and your work in the world, I would love to hear a little bit more just about your thoughts on how organizing and community healing are connected and related. How that connection between activism and our social justice work and healing. Where do you see those threads, those
Mm.
overlaps?
Yeah, thanks for all that you shared. And I love this conversation. And I just want to, before I answer your question, just acknowledge some of the comments that have been in the chat. But I think you've spoken to ethos and empathy, talked about being diagnosed with burnout last March and wondering how long it takes to heal. And you had talked about, that it really varied for you. There were different times where it took longer and then times where you were more resourced and it didn't take as long. So I think that it depends on, like, there's different ranges of burnout.
Mhm,
And then folks, yeah, just appreciating what you said about the acknowledgement of the work won't get done mindset. And like that I think is like important to recognize that that sometimes that's not going to happen. And then there was one other comment. Oh yeah, and then the fear of missing out takes hold, and that's why some don't take the break we need. So I think what you were talking about in terms of slowing down, I think is really important. We live in such a fast-paced world, and it's very easy to miss the signals that our bodies are giving us, and that it needs rest or it needs, whatnot. And so I think I really appreciate your emphasis on self-awareness.
mhm,
And I think that, and that ties to your question of how does organizing and community healing, how are they connected? And that, to me, I've gotten to the point where I believe that they're the same, even
mhm,
though I know they're like different worlds. And like I think that there is a discomfort in the activist world with sometimes connecting with the Western like healing world,
mhm,
and maybe vice versa too. But to me, they're one and the same, because if we as organizers or activists are doing work that is related to like healing the world's water, or like thinking about um, the plant world and how we are destroying the plant world and wanting to heal that part of the earth, or we're talking about healing from colonization, and we're talking about healing from white supremacy and dismantling it, that it's, to me, it's a continuum, that if we're trying to dismantle these systems of oppression, that healing has to be a part of it. And I used to see them as separate, but now it's hard for me to
mhm,
disentangle that, so that when I worked on water for a really long time, and there were times where like I was so busy, I didn't drink enough water, that like I was like
right,
advocating for people to have clean water, and then I
right.
wasn't taking the time to hydrate myself. And so,
Mhm,
like we have to live also, I mean, obviously for very different reasons, that I wasn't drinking water. But they're tied, right? And so I think that, and then we can't be doing this work without acknowledging like the deep grief that we feel,
mhm,
just to live in a system that prioritizes profit over people's health and our bodies,
mhm,
and things as precious and sacred as water. And so I think that we the idea of healing has become so individualized because of the economic system in which we live, but there are, if we draw from our ancestors' wisdom and various cultures, that healing is collective. That and I believe in self-care, like we have to do things on a day-to-day basis, but coming together in community, I believe, is part of the organizing as well.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And so, a question for you, a theme in this series is food, and like the healing nature of food and connecting to land. And so, a question for you, Bonita, is how can growing food or food in general and connecting to the land help with burnout? And like,
Mm.
how can the cycles of the season be a reminder about engaging and burning out?
Mm. Thanks for that. So in this last decade, I have learned a lot about growing, growing my own food, growing a lot of my own food. And part of that, I would say maybe in the first half of the decade, it was learning a lot about the plants and observing the plants and observing what was happening in the garden and kind of getting more of an intuitive sense of what the plants needed. And I think over time, that practice of listening and paying attention, because the plants that I know don't speak English. And so it's a different sort of listening, that listening also became an inner listening, a listening to myself and a tuning into the more subtle rhythms and energies of life through the seasons. And what's so for me, there's something very, very precious and very magical and very sacred about eating food that I have being nurtured by plants that I have nurtured, that it's this reciprocal sort of supportive love relationship. And also it brings me back to, so after my book came out, I had a number of conversations with different people who had read the book, and there was this pattern that emerged. There were some people, as I listened to them, it I had so much concern about I had so much concern, and I wanted to urge them to put on the emergency brake because I was worried about them crashing and burning, and I saw and still see their work as being so important, and that I don't think we can afford to lose them for a year or for 5 years or for a decade. And so there were those people. And then on the other side, there were also people, as I listened to them, I could hear their care and their concern about the state of the world. And I wanted to tell them to do more. I really wanted to encourage them to take more responsibility, to take the next step. And I kind of wondered for a little while, how, am I contradicting myself? And what I realized after some reflection was that our energy levels, our engagement, our learning can be very cyclical, like the phases of the moon, like the cycle of the seasons. And when I think about activism, for probably many of us who are on this call, we might be in, the autumn of our activism work, maybe the autumn of our lives, maybe not. And it behooves us to be able to know when it's time for us to put something down. And it doesn't mean necessarily putting something down forever. It might be a pause. It might be taking a sabbatical. It might be taking a season away. It might be taking a year away. And so giving the land that winter time to rest. And then on the other side, we might be in the springtime with our activism, or in the springtime with the project. And it can be very, very healthy when we're in that part of the cycle to give it lots of energy and lots of care and lots of attention, to allow that work and that project to flourish and to be full and to be abundant. And so it really comes back to discernment. It comes back to really knowing ourselves, and it comes back to being able to listen and know what we need. And and then I just want to tie this back to talking about self-care and talking about community care, and the theme of this being around hope. One, so when I think about self-care, it's more than it includes all the things that I do for myself, and it also includes the things that support me, the things that nurture me, the things that fuel me, and cultivating a sense of hope and joy in my life is part of that. And so while I'm speaking, I also want to invite folks to put in the chat one or two words to share something that what fuels you, what feeds you in your life, what nourishes you. And for me, when I talk about nourishment, when I talk about hope, it's not a passive sense of hope. It's not based in ignoring what's happening in the world and just putting on a bright smile and kind of having a fake positivity and wishing for the best. For me, it is my hope fuels the work that I do in the world, and the work that I do fuels my hope. And so it's an active way of cultivating wellness in myself and cultivating wellness in the communities around me. So what nurtures you? What gives you hope? And maybe so just while people are sharing in the chat, I would love to hear from you too, Emma, because when you're one of the people in my life that when I read your work, when I listen to you, I see you as being so aware of all of the big challenges of so just the crises on so many levels and how and I see you taking so much responsibility in your work for that, and that can be really heavy. And so I just wonder, in your work, in your life, what fuels you? What helps you have that balance? What gives you a sense of hope and nourishment?
Hmm. Thank you for that question. I think it's really important to like think about what gives us hope, and I really appreciated all that you shared. And for me, it's I oscillate between hope and despair, but at what underlies my work is that I know that there are so many amazing people doing so many amazing things, and like
Mm-hmm,
I draw a lot of hope from that, and we see that, right? Like
mm-hmm,
people who are in this work, we are so lucky to meet so many amazing people who do like such incredible work, so that gives me a lot of hope. And then young people too, the youth are like doing incredible and amazing things, and like making leaps and bounds like in just like a generation, and so
yeah.
that gives me a lot of hope too. And a lot of folks are actually talking about like nature in the chat, and it's the same for me, like being in, I know we are nature as well, but being by the water and being in touching soil, and like same with what Sunshana is saying, being in the trees. I live close to Gatineau Park, so I feel very fortunate. So like on days where like that are really difficult, then I will just go and walk in amongst the trees, or go for a bike ride, or in the summertime I'll go swimming, and that really energizes me. And then yeah, I mean, I think the same as what you're saying of being self-aware, being present with my emotions, and that's a work in progress, but just working through some of the difficult emotions allows me to feel hope again, and when I do feel despair. So spending that time with myself, and then being in community too, like having those connections is really important too, and really helpful and nourishing. Yeah, so we'll have some. So I appreciate all that you've shared, Bonita, and like lots of great sharing in the chat, just with folks like what they shared about what gives them hope, planting trees, watching birds, seeing all the other people doing dedicated work or dedicated to this work, alignment and synchronicities, tender tender reminders of magic, earth love for sure, laughter and friendship, absolutely. When the sun is shining, yes, absolutely. All of those things. So I think it's that what you were saying, Bonita, is like the like holding both. That like we know that there are these terrible things that are happening in this world, and there is also all this beauty and
Yes.
magic that happens in this world.
Yeah.
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 So I might open it up for some questions. We have
Hmm.
5 or so minutes where we can just ask any of the audience members if they have any questions. I saw some earlier that we may have missed singing also. Yes, definitely. Singing. I'm just going to see if I can go back and see. But yeah, if any of you folks have questions for Bonita or I, please feel free to add to the chat. And maybe while folks are thinking of questions, I will ask you. So we talk about these different crises that are happening, and like what are some other specific ways that you cultivate hope and joy in your life?
Mm. You know, it's really interesting. So we moved here to our home into this garden about, I think it's been over 10 years now. And I didn't realize how much I could fall in love with the place. I never grew up with, I didn't grow up with a sense of connection to land, to a place, to a particular river. And this is part of what nurtures me. This is part of what gives me hope is being here and just seeing the space evolve through the years and through the seasons as well too. Just seeing, I think one thing that really lights up my heart is the fireflies that we have here in our garden, because so in the practices, in the way that we take care of the land, we really have done a lot of soil building and we have nurtured a lot of biodiversity. And I love that those few weeks in the summer when the fireflies are out and about and happy, and what it makes my heart sing, because it's the one, you mentioned before, Emma, about how sometimes in the work that we do in the world, we don't necessarily see the outcome of our work or the impact of our work. And when I see the fireflies here and I walk around the neighborhood, it was a friend that pointed this out to me the first time, was that when I walk around our neighborhood, other people's gardens hardly have any fireflies, and most of the fireflies are in our block are here. And so it's a very ecological sort of observation, and it also feels so magical for me, and that really gives me a sense of hope, and yeah, that fills my tank, definitely.
That's beautiful. That's amazing. So it's like the fireflies are responding to like what you're doing in your garden.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
amazing. There,
exactly.
there's a question from Sunshan asking, what are your favorite plants for when you're feeling down?
I actually don't have a particular plant for when I'm feeling down. I, in a way, I wish I did. And it's kind of whoever's around and whoever's awake at that season. And so in the spring, I'm just excited about anybody that is green and coming up through the soil. And so and so most of the plants that are in our garden we've planted a lot of perennial edibles and medicinal plants. And in the spring in particular, I really enjoy Solomon seal shoots and hosta shoots and nettles and fiddleheads. And in this season, it's kind of who's the last one that's awake before the winter comes fully. And the last that I saw before, as it was as we were getting colder and colder nights, and before the snow came, the Turkish rocket was still really, really green and still yummy. And some of the kale was just still really delicious. And the perennial arugula was still going. So yeah, it's just kind of whoever happens to be there, because they all, it's like maybe it's like asking like a mom who's your favorite child, and it depends on, or a parent who's your favorite child. And I think some parents um, would maybe diplomatically say, oh, they're all my favorite. So I'm going to say they're all my favorite depending on the season.
I love that. And Sunshine is also saying, so thanks for that question. Unnamed newborn plants are also so good in the spring. Resilient plants. Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to have to wrap up soon, but I just want to highlight one thing that you said that really sticks with me is the cyclical and seasonal way in which you approach work and being. And I think that is really important that we go back to that. That I think part of the what we see with capitalism or colonization is like disconnection to our own cycles and to nature's cycles and seasonal cycles and like day cycles. And I think what was highlighted earlier about like not being able to get everything done is almost like a surrender to this season. And like I feel more tired, all I feel like doing is reading books and napping, and then I
Mm-hmm.
have this long list, this long to-do list, and like there are things that need to get done, but there are some things that I can put off, or just they're not going to get done. And it's figuring out a way to prioritize, but also like making yourself a priority and working within the seasons. I think is just, I think that's been a big part of my healing, is like, like recognizing that there are times that we need to rest, and there are times where we're allowed to rest, and that will make us more rejuvenated and energized for springtime, whenever the
Mm-hmm.
springtime happens. Yeah, so thank you so much for all that you shared. So there is
Mm-hmm.
another question. Uh, yeah, so yeah, climate anxiety. I hear you. So ethos and
Mm-hmm.
empathy is saying, who else in here is feeling anxiety of how warm it still is? I write from Greece and it's 20 degrees mid-November. Not normal at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks, Bunny, to
Yeah.
acknowledge that. Finally snowed here. I think it was like a weekend or so ago where it was like 20 degrees at nighttime
Yep.
in November.
Yep.
Yeah, so very worrisome. Yeah, okay. Well, I just
Yes.
want to thank you, Bonita, for all
Mm-hmm.
that you shared. I love hearing you talk, and like that's so soothing for me to like hear somebody talk about both, right? And holding the
Mm-hmm.
both is so very important, and how you do that, learning about how you do that. So I hope that folks learn from your wisdom. I just want to give some space for you to talk about how people can follow you, or
Mm-hmm.
how they can work with you.
Okay, thank you. So I want to offer to folks who are with us a discount code if anyone is interested in purchasing my ebook. So, Embers of Hope, Embracing Life in an Age of Ecological Destruction and Climate Chaos. So this is the paperback. So I'm offering specifically a discount code, 25% off the ebook. If you want to buy that in the next 24 hours, you can do that on my website and enter the code selfcare, 1117. So no spaces, self-care 1117. And a couple of other things I want to put out to folks. So I was talking about the cycle of the seasons and just how that relates to our energy and to our activism. And I wrote a full article on that. So if folks are interested, that is on one of the two websites of mine. And I also, when I first launched my book, I did a crowdfunder to provide free copies of the paperback to low-income BIPOC activists. So if you would like to receive a free copy of the paperback and you identify as a low-income BIPOC activist, please let me know. You can connect with me on my website, embersofhopebook.com, or on Instagram. My handle is our Living Hearth. So living our OUR living H and then earth, our living hearth. And I look forward to connecting more with folks and just want to really encourage us to just to do our best. So I'm just that last question or comment by was it by Ethos and Empathy, just about the the warmth right now and about climate anxiety. For me, just I'm really still, my mind is still on this piece around being present with that, acknowledging that, and also, and at the same time, putting our energy towards what we have in this moment, what we can appreciate in this moment today, what we can contribute today in our lives. And so not getting stuck on, not letting ourselves stay stuck on the anxiety. I think the anxiety is healthy and normal, and at the same time, we have choice in where to put our energy and our attention as well. And so that can go, and so our response, our choicefulness around that can be put towards taking better care of ourselves and taking better care of all of the life around us, which includes humans and the more than human neighbors in our lives. And I see a question about the discount code, so I'm just putting the discount code in the chat. It's selfcare 1117. So SELFCARE 1117. And yeah, thanks, friends. Thank you so very much, Emma, for hosting me, and thank you, Sophia, for being there with us, and thank you to the network for this time and space. It's really a privilege to be part of this series and to be with all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bonita. I love this conversation. I feel like we could have talked for like 2 hours easily.
Yeah, I'm sure we
Would love
could have.
would love to continue this conversation with you some other time. And so we'll put the links in of your website in the comments on the replay. So it'll take a little bit of time for the replay to come up. But I also want to let folks know I'm doing a 4-week healing circle this winter, and really addressing the core beliefs that we internalize through different systems of oppression, or whether that's the emotions tied to that as well. We also have a burnout program that folks can work with me on. It's either 6 weeks or 12 weeks. So I'll just include some information in the comments on the replay, and folks can get in touch with me. But thank you everyone for joining. It was so great to have your engagement in the chat, and I really hope to continue these kinds of conversations with you all. And I'll pass it over to Sophia now.
This was healing and powerful, and the sun is shining, and so it gives me the energy that I need to be, still and still in recovery. I've had surgery earlier in the month, and so I'm still on a healing journey, and so just hearing about healing and hope is really good. And so as you guys know, in the replay there will be comments, the codes will be there. We're also reaching out to you guys via Eventbrite. And so we'll reach out to you guys again with all the book recommendations. And so continue to follow the page, because Emma will be back next week with another fabulous conversation and another amazing guest. I want to thank all of you for joining in and all of your comments. It was wonderful to have you, Bonita. It was great to meet you and great to hear about your journey and the journey that all of us are on. Emma, again, thank you so much for hosting these amazing conversations. We really appreciate it. Guys, you can catch us here on IG, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And we'll be back again next week with another amazing conversation in the series. So thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It's
you.
been wonderful.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.